Hello there! In Acts chapter 8, the Apostle Philip tells the good news of Jesus Christ to an Ethiopian eunuch. The man joyfully accepted baptism from Philip and brought his new faith back to the Ethiopian court. He thereby began the legacy of African Christianity that continues to this day, a vibrant and growing family of faith with ancient roots and fascinating history. Although the Bible does not name this man, tradition gives his name as Simeon Bakos. Join us as we explore the world of ancient African Christianity that he originated. Join us as we follow along in Simeon's wake. The Sacred Son, Sethianism. Today, we begin our exploration of the so-called Gnostic schools with the mysteries and magic of Sethianism. Now, I'm sure this causes much confusion for you because it just so happens there is a Finnish death metal band that is called Sethian. And, the Venn diagram of people who listen to church history podcasts and people who enjoy Finnish death metal is basically a circle. But no, Sethianism was not just the devoted followers of these Nordic musicians. For starters, the Sethianism we are covering is older. Much older. In fact, according to its adherents, Sethianism goes all the way back to the very first Seth. You remember Seth, right? Right? No? Well, that's fair, because he gets all of about 2 verses in Genesis before the narrator moves off to talk about other things. Seth is Adam and Eve's 3rd son. It rather more famously does not go very well with their first 2 sons, Cain and Abel. After Cain murders Abel, God tells Cain that was a very bad thing to do and banishes him from the family. Then Eve bears Seth, and names him Seth, which comes from a Hebrew word meaning to appoint or to put. It's kind of like the English word set. Eve says this is because God has appointed Seth as her replacement son for Abel, which, boy, if there was ever a surefire way to give your kid issues. Mom, why is my sister named Youth? Well, son, your dad really misses his lost youth. And when your sister was born, it was kind of like he got it back, so he named her Youth. Oh, wow, that's a heartwarming story. Thanks, Mom. You're welcome, firstborn son who was tragically murdered. Seth gets very little treatment in the biblical material, but according to the Sethians, he was the very first person to attain to the secret knowledge of the spiritual universe. We'll get to what that knowledge is in a minute, but first I just want to note that this is a very common thing in biblical interpretation. In the Bible, there are all kinds of side characters who don't really get all that much attention. Later biblical interpreters will often want to expand the plots of these figures, filling out their stories and providing more background that explains their appearances in the Bible. And it's not just something that so-called Gnostics do. It's something that all kinds of commentators do. Take, for example, the figure of Og, king of Bashan. Og is a very minor character in the Bible. He's one of the kings of Canaan that the Israelites conquer as they invade the land. That's it. That's his whole point. But later generations grow his legend to giant sizes. Literally giant sizes. They talk about how Og was the last of the giants that walked the land during the days of Noah. In fact, in the 100s BC, somebody wrote a book called The Book of Giants that talks about Og and all of his super cool adventures, including slaying a dragon one time, which is kind of the definition of cool. The Sethians are doing a similar thing with Seth. They are taking a minor biblical character and expanding his legend. And what a legend it is. The secret knowledge Seth obtains is the understanding of all the spiritual realities in the cosmos. The pattern of these realities is laid out in a book called The Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, or the Gospel of the Egyptians for short. Our best guess is that this book was written about 200 AD, although if you're a Sethian, I guess you think that Seth wrote it down way back at the beginning of the human race. Either that or he kept it all in his head for 5 millennia or so. So, what is in the Gospel of the Egyptians? Some truly wild stuff, man. So, without further ado, let's delve right in. The book opens by saying that it is a book about the great invisible spirit, the Father, who is supreme and transcendent over everything and who cannot be named. Of course, it sounds like the Gospel just did name him because it called this spirit the Father, but ignore that bit for now. In Simeon's Wake, now brought to you by self-contradiction. So anyway, we have the transcendent, supreme, awe-inspiring Father. And then from that Father come three different powers: the Father, the Mother, and the Son. These are the first of a multitude of aeons that will come forth. Now the aeons, we typically spell that A-E-O-N-S. The aeons are a common feature of many Gnostic systems, and they work a little bit differently in each particular system. In some cases, they are independent cosmic entities who represent various facets of reality. We'll see a lot of that in Valentinus' system. For the Sethians, aeons aren't quite that independent. They're more like aspects of God, like God's wisdom or fecundity or goodness. They aren't separate entities from God, but when you think about them in isolation, you're thinking of an aeon. It sort of has to do with the way the mind comes to think about God, to divide up God's aspects and consider them separately. So, if you were wondering why the invisible spirit who's called Father emanates an aeon who is also the Father, that may be why. The Gospel is here delineating three aspects of God as Father, Mother, and Child, not describing three brand spanking new entities. However, despite the fact that they are not entities in their own right, they get lots of cool names. The Mother, for example, is also known as Barbelo, which is a common title in mystery religions for a supreme feminine divine figure. The Son is described as the thrice male child. What does it mean to be thrice male? I don't know, man, but it sounds cool. Also, it sounds like some kind of ad for a men's grooming product. In Simeon's Wake is now brought to you by Triple Masculinity. For a guy like you, regular masculinity is not enough. Even double masculinity won't do. No, a man like you deserves only the manliest, most testosterone-titrated products. Now try Triple Masculinity. You know all the things that guys like? Beer, guns, red meat, hating vegetables. Now have it all in triplicate. 3 beers, 3 guns, 3 times as much meat, 3 Y chromosomes. Real men have genetic disabilities from multiple chromosomes. Real men have crippling amounts of testosterone. Triple Masculinity. When your insecurities are exercised, so is your gender performance. Now, each of these 3 aeons then goes on to emanate another 3 aeons, which means they each get their own little mini trinity of sorts. It's nice. The Mother's Trinity is the triple male child, some angel dude named Yowel, who shows up in other Gnostic myths, and Esaphesh, the so-called child of the child. The Son gets a trinity of the great Christ, Pronoia, which means providence or forethought, and the self-generated Logos. Now, in between the first trinity and the others, we get another being called the Domedon Doxamegon. I don't know who Domedon Doxamegon is, so don't ask. The Gospel of Egyptians doesn't say, and when I tried to Google it, I got a bunch of hits for a song by some death metal artist who released an album named after this eon. Man, what is it with heavy metal artists and Gnosticism? I mean, I get it. Domedon Doxamegon is an undeniably cool name, so I get why you would want to use it. And the Gospel of the Egyptians is very clear as to how cool this aeon is. He is the light of lights, the aeon of aeons. He is the throne of the Father, and also has the throne within him, if you think about it, and all kinds of glories and powers and beings shoot forth from him, and then a great mystery bursts forth. No, I did not just make the sound of a 90s modem for no reason there. The mystery that bursts forth in the text is a whole bunch of vowels. Like, at this point in the text, the Gospel of the Egyptians just lists all 7 Coptic vowels 22 times each. Just like the letter I 22 times, the letter E 22 times, etc., etc. Now, what does this mean? Scholars have no idea. The Sethians did the mystery part of their religion very, very well. So, I don't know, let's just roll with it for now. After this, we get a description of all the heavenly beings and how they proceed into the trinities that I described above. And the angels sing and stuff and praise the invisible spirit and talk about how great everything is. With the spiritual world created, it's time for the material world to follow suit. One of the aeons is the mother of the incorruptible ones, and she gives birth to Adam, the first human. Well, actually, in the text, he's called Adamos. Well, actually, before that, the author says he's going to name him and says 3 times, Ian, Ian, Ea, Ea, Ea. Again, what that sequence of vowels means, we aren't sure, but it's clearly very important to them. Sethians, man, they like their names. To understand a little bit more of this creation scheme, it helps to read a few paragraphs of the Gospel directly. So let me do that, and I quote. For this one, Adamos, is a light which radiated from the light. He is the eye of the light. For this is the first man, he through whom and to whom everything came into being, and without whom nothing came into being. The unknowable, incomprehensible Father came forth. He came down from above for the annulment of the deficiency. Then the great Logos, the divine Autogenes, and the incorruptible man Adamos mingled with each other. A Logos of man came into being. However, the man came into being through a word. He gave praise to the great, invisible, incomprehensible, virginal spirit, and the male virgin, and the thrice male child, and the male virgin Yoel, and Esaphesh, the holder of glory, the child of the child, and the crown of his glory, and the great Doxamedon Aeon, and the thrones which are in him, and the powers which surround him, the glories and the incorruptions, and their whole pleroma which I mentioned above, and the ethereal earth, the receiver of God, where the holy men of great light receive shape, the men of the Father of the silent, living silence, the Father and their whole pleroma, as I mentioned before. The great Logos, the divine Autogenes, and the incorruptible man Adamos gave praise, and they asked for power and eternal strength for the Autogenes, for the completion of the 4 aeons, in order that through them there may appear the glory and power of the invisible Father, of the holy men of the great light, which will come into the world, which is the image of the night. The incorruptible man Adamos asked for them a son out of himself, in order that the Son may become father of the immovable, incorruptible race, so that through that race the silence and the voice may appear, and through it the dead aeon may raise itself, so that it may dissolve. And thus there came from above the power of the great light, the manifestations. She gave birth to the 4 great lights, Harmozel, Oriel, Davithe, Eleleth, and the great incorruptible Seth, the son of the incorruptible man Adamos. Okay, so there is a lot going on here. Let's talk about a few bits of it. First of all, note that Adam and the Logos work together to create the human race. Through their mingling comes forth the Logos of man, which basically means the pattern of humanity, the form or idiom of humanity in Philo's words. That's the distinction the text is making. The pattern or image of humanity is a direct result of the mingling of the Logos and Adam. Actual human beings are made through God's word in accordance with Genesis. Second, you will notice that the text says that this is the completion of the ethereal earth, not the physical one. We're still in the world of the spirit when all this is happening. It says that the great men of light in the world receive their form in the ethereal earth, but they don't stay there. You may find it helpful to remember Philo's idea that there were 2 creations, not one. The Gospel of the Egyptians seems to have a similar idea in mind. Third, you will notice that Seth is born as a kind of savior figure. Adam wants a kid for all kinds of reasons. He wants to be a dad of an immovable and incorruptible race, and I mean, truly, who doesn't? But furthermore, it's said, He wants this kid so that the silence and the voice may appear, and through it the dead aeon may raise itself so that it may dissolve. I know you are confused by that, probably. Don't worry, this is not one of those incomprehensible mysteries. I kind of know what's going on here, and we'll get to it. But first, we have to get to the creation of the actual material world. Surely that's next, right? We're going to talk about how the material world gets made? Well, the next thing the text talks about is chaos and hell, which is not encouraging. A little bit more of the text, and I quote, "After 5,000 years, the great light Eleleth spoke. Let someone reign over the chaos and Hades. And there appeared a cloud whose name is Hylic Sophia. She looked out on the parts of the chaos. And the great angel Gamaliel spoke to the great Gabriel, the minister of the great light Oriel. He said, 'Let an angel come forth, in order that he may reign over the chaos and Hades.' Then the cloud, being agreeable, came forth in the two monads, each one of which had light. Then Sakla, the great angel, saw the great demon who was with him, Nebruel, and they became together a begetting spirit of the earth. They begot the assisting angels. Sakla said to the great demon Nebruel, 'Let the 12 aeons come into being.' The great angel Sakla said to the great angels, 'Go, and let each of you reign over his world.' Each one of the 12 angels went forth. And after the founding of the world, Sakla said to his angels, 'I am a jealous God, and apart from me nothing has come into being, since he trusted in his nature.' Then a voice came from on high, saying, 'The man exists, and the son of the man. Because of the descent of the image above, which is like its voice in the height of the image which has looked out through the looking out of the image above, the first creature was formed.'" End quote. So once again, we have a lot of things to talk about. Apparently, this great big celestial party just kept on going for 5,000 years, but then someone noticed that there was still a lot of chaos and death and weirdness, and was like, we should really do something about that. The first aeon to respond to this call is Hylic Sophia. Now note that Hylic is not part of her name. That word is spelled Hylic, and it's an adjective that means material or matter-like. Now this is really interesting, because here it becomes very, very clear that for the Sethians, the problem, the source of all evil, is the material world itself. It's described as death and Hades. It's dark, it's evil, and if you notice, it was not created by the Father. Seriously, it does not appear to have anything to do with the generation of all those lovely aeons or the 5 millennia-long cosmic party. It was just there, hanging out. The idea that there was some kind of primordial matter that existed alongside God and which God formed but did not create is a pretty common one in this period. You can even read the Bible as supporting this idea. What does Genesis 1 say? That in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. What is this earth and water that were there in the beginning? According to the Sethians, it was primeval matter, dark and chaotic and waiting to be formed. Now the angels start to divvy up the world and decide who is in charge of what, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. Matter may suck, but somebody's got to organize it. However, we then get to a problem pretty quickly, which is that Sakla, the head angel, gets a little big for his britches. He declares that he is the only God and there is no other besides him, which is obviously false. I mean, we've just spent the last 2/3 of this gospel talking about all the other divine realities that are out there. I mean, come on, dude. The heavenly beings have no patience for Sakla's nonsense, and a voice booms out that sets up the entire history of humanity. Let me read that part for you again. Then a voice came from on high saying, "The man exists, and the Son of Man. Because of the descent of the image above, which is like its voice in the height of the image, which is looked out through the looking out of the image above, the first creature was formed." End quote. The response to Sakla's arrogance is to point to the existence of the celestial human beings, Adam and Seth. They come from on high. They are not part of this gross material universe, but they will descend into it, and they will be living reminders that not everything in this world is under Sakla's influence. What we see here is the start of an idea, popular in Gnostic movements and arguably present in the Gospel of John, that human beings come from different points of origin. Most human beings are completely formed through the agency of the material world. They are beings of matter through and through. They cannot understand spiritual realities. They have no mind for it. And they cannot be saved. However, there are some people that are spiritual. They are of the race of Adam and Seth. These folks have a divine spark inside them that will light their way through the world and which will ultimately bring them back to the heavenly realm they came from. All the trials we see in the Bible are the trials of this secret spiritual race. The flood, the plagues of Egypt, the fiery doom of the world. These are all trials that this race will face as part of its journey back to the heavenly world. They also face the wrath of material powers that do not and cannot understand their mission. Fortunately, they will have a leader. Seth will come into the world. And like any good mission, he has to get a code name, a secret identity to protect him. He will not simply come down as Seth. No, he will come into the world as Jesus of Nazareth. This is the big reveal that the whole gospel has been building to. Seth is not just the third child of the human race. He is Jesus Christ, the great redeemer of the human race. Which, come to think of it, sounds exactly like the sort of story a neglected third child would tell to rehab his image. I don't know, maybe this is all just a big PR campaign from Seth. But that's deeper than we need to go today. Here is the way the Gospel of the Egyptians summarizes Seth/Jesus' mission. And I quote, "Then the great Seth was sent by the four lights, by the will of the Autogenes, and by the whole Pleroma, through the gift and the good pleasure of the great invisible Spirit, and the five seals, and the whole Pleroma. He passed through the three parousias which I mentioned before, the flood, and the conflagration, and the judgment of the archons and the powers and the authorities, to save her, the race who went astray, through the reconciliation of the world, and the baptism through a logos-begotten body, which the great Seth prepared for himself secretly through the Virgin, in order that the saints may be begotten by the Holy Spirit, through invisible secret symbols, through a reconciliation of the world with the world, through the renouncing of the world, and the God of the 13 aeons, and through the convocations of the saints and the ineffable ones, and through the incorruptible bosom, and through the great light of the Father, who pre-existed with his providence, and established through her the holy baptism that surpasses the heaven, through the incorruptible, logos-begotten one, even Jesus the living one, even he whom the great Seth has put on. And through him he nailed the powers of the 13 aeons, and established those who are brought forth and taken away. He armed them with an armor of the knowledge of his truth, with an unconquerable power of incorruptibility." End quote. Try not to worry too much about the incomprehensible Greek words that were in that paragraph I just read. Just notice that it describes Christ's story. It's a procession through the heavenly realms, cheered on by all the powers of heaven through the trials and tribulations of the world. The 13 aeons are those spirits, Sakla and the 12 angels, who govern the world. Through his life, death, and resurrection, he totally owns them, and lets his followers know that there is another world full of truly benevolent beings, and that they are from that world and will be returning to it. In this scheme, salvation is not a matter of redeeming the whole world. The vast majority of the world is not redeemable. It's material, it's gross, it's weird, and it's utterly undivine. Salvation is about rescuing the race of humanity from the powers of the material world, and thereby showing the ruling aeons the futility of their attempts to rule on their own. The gospel then concludes with a hymn to Jesus, including, what else? Another incomprehensible stream of vowels. Ie, Iesus, eo, ua. Fortunately, this stream of vowels is not quite as indecipherable as it seems. We have a couple of theories as to what is going on here. If you divide up the vowels just right, they spell out a Greek phrase, who exists as Son forever and ever. You are what you are who you are. So this might be part of the Gospel's praise of Christ. Another possibility is that these vowels are linked to the Hebrew name for God. A third possibility is that this is intended as some kind of mnemonic aid for a secret Sethian saying, something they wouldn't have written down but would put clues to in their texts. Hindu and Buddhist monks do this kind of stuff too. They have long mantras to chant, and sometimes they'll use these vowels as aids to remembering what they chant. Perhaps the Gnostics did something similar. We know there was a Sethian presence in Alexandria, and we know that there were Hindu missionaries there. Maybe they met and swapped spiritual strategies. Finally, we get a little explanatory note telling us that what we have just read is the gospel Seth wrote and hid away in a mountain upon which the sun never rises, where it will be hidden so that it may be revealed at the end of time. Which does rather make you wonder why we are reading it now. I mean, it's a cool idea, but it does seem to groan a bit under the melancholy burden of reality. Thus ends the Gospel of the Egyptians, which may seem a little strange to you because it seems to have ended without having any of the, well, gospel-y bits. I mean, the Gospels in the Bible spent a lot of time describing Christ's earthly ministry and all the stuff he did. Where is that? Do the Sethians not know about it? Do they describe Christ's life elsewhere? The answer is, kind of. There is a description of Christ's earthly ministry in another Nag Hammadi text, which is called the Second Treatise of the Great Seth. As we have already established, Seth is indeed Jesus, so it's a twofer in more ways than one. Here is the summary that we get. First, Seth talks to the whole heavenly assembly and basically says that somebody really needs to go down to earth and sort out the mess that has been made. The angels and aeons all agree that this is a great plan. So he comes down and takes a body, or more precisely, as he puts it, and I quote, "I visited a bodily dwelling. I cast out the one who was in it first, and I went in, and the whole multitude of the rulers became troubled. And all the matter of the rulers, as well as all the powers born of the earth, were shaken when they saw the likeness of the image, since it was mixed. And I was the one who was in the image, not resembling him who was in the body first. For he was an earthly man, but I am from above the heavens. I did not refuse them even to become Christ, but I did not reveal myself to them in the love that was coming forth from me. I revealed that I am a stranger to the regions below." End quote. I'm not entirely sure what it means that Seth cast out the one who was in the body first. It kind of sounds like he found a human person with a whole soul of his own and everything, and then just barged in Kool-Aid Man style and kicked out the soul that was already there. Which is, number one, very rude, and number two, raises all sorts of questions. What happens to a soul that gets yeeted out of its body by a divine aeon? Does it become a ghost? Does it get reincarnated? Is there some kind of celestial homeowners court that it can go and complain to? All that the text really says is that Seth did not resemble him who was in the body first, which makes me think that Seth took a body from someone who was completely of earth, and therefore unable to be saved, and so not very important in the Sethian scheme anyway. Well, the 13 aeons in charge of the earth didn't like that very much. Some of them freaked out and ran away. Others conspired against Seth/Christ and wanted him killed, which, as you know, they did. Unless they didn't. Reading again from the Second Treatise of the Great Seth, we find the following, and I quote, "And then a voice of the world ruler came to the angels. I am God, and there is no other God but me. But I laughed joyfully when I examined his conceit. But he went on to say, Who is the human? And the entire host of his angels who had seen Adam in his dwelling were laughing at his smallness. And thus did their thought come to be removed outside the majesty of the heavens, away from the human of truth, whose name they saw, since he is in a small dwelling place. They are foolish and senseless in their empty thought, namely their laughter, and it was contagion for them. I did not die in reality, but in appearance, in order that I not be put to shame by them, because these are my kinsfolk. I removed the shame from me, and I did not become faint-hearted in the face of what happened to me at their hands. I was about to succumb to fear, and I suffered merely according to their sight and thought, so that no word might ever be found to speak about them. For my death, which they think happened to them in their error and blindness, since they nailed their man unto their death. Their thoughts did not see me, for they were deaf and blind. But in doing these things, they condemned themselves. Yes, they saw me, they punished me. It was another, their father, who drank the gall and vinegar. It was not I. They struck me with the reed. It was another, Simon, who bore the cross on his shoulder. It was another upon whom they placed the crown of thorns. But I was rejoicing in the height over all the wealth of the rulers and the offspring of their error, of their empty glory, and I was laughing at their ignorance." End quote. We are seeing here a pretty common motif in a lot of ancient speculation. To be crucified was not just painful, but utterly shameful and humiliating. For most of the ancient world, the idea that Jesus was subjected to such humiliation and was simultaneously God was virtually a contradiction in terms. In fact, one of the earliest references that we have to Christianity is a piece of graffiti. The graffiti depicts a man kneeling towards a crucified figure with a donkey's head. Below it is written, "Alexemnos worships his god." This graffiti was making fun of a Christian named Alexemnos for worshipping someone who, in the pagan mind, might as well have been an ass. Christians had many ways of responding to this mockery. Many of them emphasized that Jesus had suffered willingly and intentionally as a part of God's divine plan. But the Sethians took a different tack. They said Jesus had suffered only in appearance. It looked to the foolish forces of the world like Jesus had indeed been crucified, but this was only an illusion. In fact, Jesus had swapped places with Simon of Cyrene, the man who carries his cross for him in the Gospels. Simon was foisted on the cross and murdered. Jesus, meanwhile, was rejoicing with the celestial aeons and laughing at the foolishness of his enemies. Now, there is a lot we could say about this. For starters, this is not just a Sethian move. Islam reveres Jesus as a prophet and denies that he was crucified. Some Islamic sources will say that Judas Iscariot was crucified in his place, with the same sort of a switcheroo move that the Sethians use. Now, the Muslim solution does have the advantage of a certain fairness. After all, Judas is the one who sold Jesus out. Simon of Cyrene, on the other hand, was just a poor bystander who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Which brings us to another point. Jesus looks pretty callous to be laughing at the foolishness of the aeons while some poor man suffered and died in his place. Now, maybe Simon of Cyrene is one of those people of the earth for whom there is no hope anyway. The text does talk about the father of the bad aeons being crucified. But to laugh at the suffering of others instead of feeling compassion for the lost, well, Seth/Jesus doesn't always come across as the most loving fellow. As if to drive that point home, we then get a long section in the text about how all the great figures of the Old Testament are laughingstocks. Abraham, David, Solomon, the prophets, Moses, all laughingstocks. Why? Because they followed the wisdom of Sakla and the angels of the world instead of the celestial hosts. The whole Jewish law they followed was the work of those corrupt powers and not of the true God. Not that they had any real choice in the matter. They were created by Sakla and his angels, a sort of counterfeit humanity that mimicked the true race of Adam. These are the people of earth who cannot understand the celestial realm because they have no part of it. But you, O listener, are not. You are part of the elite few who are from above. And Seth/Jesus tells you these words so that you may know your true celestial parentage and may return to the realm of light from whence you came. Thus ends the second treatise of Seth. Once again, you'll notice that we didn't really get a lot of the details of Christ's life, mostly just an account of a crucifixion that didn't actually happen. With all that in place, it's time to wrap up our treatment of this movement. There are two larger points I want to make about what this system of thought does. The first is that we have a radical reinterpretation of the book of Genesis. First of all, the creation of the world is not the creation of a material world, but of the spiritual one. Now, we've already seen a bit of that in Philo, but Philo at least believed that Genesis also described the material world's creation. For Sethians, that's not really true, in part because the material world wasn't created at all, it was just kind of there. Moreover, for Sethians, evil does not enter the world through free choice. Evil is a result of a crisis in the Godhead that occurs when encountering the world of primordial matter. Remember what I said back at the beginning. The aeons are aspects of God that are inseparable from God in every way except thought. So when we say that some of the aeons go astray, that's really just saying that some part of God has gone astray. Perhaps the angels below God have some kind of independent existence. Maybe Sakla's a different sort of fellow, but they still derive their beings from the aeons in the end. The world of primordial matter is a problem in and of itself. It is chaos and hell, and the angels in charge of it can't really bring any goodness out of it. This, in turn, changes the good news that Christ brings. The good news is not that although you have sinned, redemption is at hand. The good news is that you were never a part of this crappy world to begin with. Christ, your brother from on high, has arrived to tell you the secret to escape it and return to the world of bliss. So does Christ heal people? Sure. He does cool miracles and stuff too. But the real core of his ministry is not what he does, but who he is and what he teaches. That is what Sethianism focuses on. That is his saving power. Because of all that, and this is point number 2, Sethianism involves an extremely negative characterization of traditional Judaism. The God of Judaism, the one who says there are no others beside him, that is Sakla, the angel, not the eternal Father, not the great invisible Spirit. And all the treasures of ancient Judaism, the law, the prophets, the creation saga, they are all the creations of those lower gods. Or at best, heavily veiled allegories that nobody can interpret properly without Gnostic insight. But the wisdom of Seth is not the only system on offer. There were other teachers of wisdom with many other ways of understanding cosmic realities. Next time we'll move on to the Valentinians, another fascinating group. Our discussion will involve pumpkins, aeons, and even an almost pope. All of this and more belong to the self-described wisdom teachers of Simeon's Wake. Thank you for listening to In Simeon's Wake, part of the Earth and Altar Podcast Network. If you liked the episode, please leave it a review and drop a like on that episode at your earliest convenience, or even before. It's nice. If you'd like to support this work, head on over to patreon.com/Ben Wyatt. That's patreon.com/Ben Wyatt, WYATT. Until next time, stay curious.